Welcome to the Unfiltered Show from the Score Studios. My name's Joseph Casciaro. That's Tyler McKillop. And we're here today to talk about, I was going to say a scintillating NBA offseason. It was kind of a slow mover, but some things have happened.
Yeah.
So let's dig in today to the biggest names that have changed teams so far this offseason. And then we'll end the show talking about a guy who was drafted that there's a lot of...
you haven't heard any takes on.
Not sure if you've heard about LeBron's son. But if we're going to talk about the biggest names to change teams this summer, we've got to start with Paul George. Paul George goes from the Clippers to the Sixers via free agency. Clippers just let him walk. Your thoughts on it? I mean, we talked to Paul George last week in our free agency preview. Mm-hmm. At the time, we talked about how even though the Sixers made the most sense by far, the recent report was that, the Sixers were actually now out of the running or pulling themselves out of the running. Well, apparently they never did pull themselves out of the running, and Paul George never had them out of the running.
Apparently they didn't have their eyes on pretty much anybody else. If this did not go the George way, the way that things would have had, or the way that it would have materialized off the fact that Maxey would have had to have gotten paid and they just would have been completely out of luck. That's the biggest takeaway for everybody this free agency so far is the new CBA has just completely changed the way rosters are being built right now, because I love the move for Philadelphia. It rewards a team that, of course, has two homegrown talents, guys that they've drafted and developed, and they're looking for that key piece. I'm pretty sure Adam Silver said literally those exact things. We want to reward teams that are able to draft, develop, assign value to those players that have been with them and say, hey, we want to bring you back, or hey, you're getting this max contract. And then, when you're looking for that final piece to the puzzle, like the Sixers are, I think, they're able to do that. And I'm pretty sure this was the first max contract, something along the first max contract to be signed since 2019. Like
it was the it's the one you could argue
as a free agent or whatever it is.
The only guy other than LeBron James and Steph Curry to sign a full max at age 34 or older.
Isn't there something though of during free agency a player changing teams and getting the full max?
So
since 2019,
he might be the first, but he's definitely probably the best player to change teams via free agency since 2019. So that makes sense. And the only other guy in that convo obviously is Jalen Brunson, but he didn't sign a max contract. So that might be.
I think that's what it is. So I do think that makes too much sense. I think it's smart from George, because I do think that this is a team that gives him a better chance of grabbing a championship. But it's also about how Philly feels about the perfect way to do this is that we'll get into the Clippers stuff is the fact that they have all their assets. They were able to get George in free agency, that, they're going to give him these 4 years. They're probably not going to get the same player in year 3 and 4 as they are in 1 and 2, but they're probably still going to have the flexibility to be able to take what's left of his deal, put some picks with it if they're still getting what they expect to get from Joel Embiid by the time he gets to those years 3 and 4, that they can go out and seek another player to pair with these two if they still have them without... They might put themselves in a difficult spot for the later future, but there's still the opportunity to do so in George's later years of his contract too.
Yeah, I absolutely love this for Philly, and not just because on May 12th I wrote a feature titled "Why Paul George and the 76ers Need Each Other," or did an unfiltered video about it. But in general, I just think this fit is so perfect, and I love the fact, like you said, the Sixers and Daryl Morey is smart enough to know that in terms of just on-court impact versus contract value, is Paul George at age 37 going to be worth $57 million a year? Probably not.
No.
But you have an MVP-level superstar in his prime right now. You have another homegrown budding star, and already all-star, who was just coming off of his rookie scale contract and therefore gave you an advantage in that he was not taking up that much of the cap. Yep. You could wait to re-sign him until after you use your cap space. They had a very rare opportunity for a team with two players already that good to add a third in that category. And good for them for paying up and doing it, even though they do know that, he's not going to be an all-star caliber player for the life of the contract, but we're trying to win right now with these two guys, and for at least the next couple of years, he gives them that chance. And this is the other thing I wanted to talk about. I know Paul George is easy to criticize. Trust me, I've criticized him plenty.
Yeah.
I know he's easy to criticize. I know he's had his own share of playoff hiccups, and so some people will roll their eyes. And a lot of the comments on both my video and my feature at the time were people saying, something along the lines of, oh, great, you're going to try to help Joel Embiid get over the playoff hump by bringing in an injury-prone older guy who's got his own postseason struggles. But let's not forget how good Paul George still is. He is still an elite two-way wing who is coming off a season where he averaged almost 23 points on 61% true shooting, shot better than 50% from 2-point range, 40% from 3, 90% from the free throw line. He is one of 9 players ever to do that while averaging 22-plus points. So, like, he's far from washed.
Yeah.
He's still a great offensive player, an all-star caliber offensive player, a great wing defender. And now he gets to be most likely the third option on offense, but he's a great off-ball player, so that's fine. His defense with Embiid will help insulate Maxey. It'll probably be good for self-preservation on George's part to, be behind these guys, but also good for Embiid. He eases the load on him. Just any way you think of this, it's perfect. And I think we talked about this on a previous show, but like, unlike so many other wannabe super teams and big threes we've seen recently, this new big three is well balanced.
Yeah.
You got a guard, a wing, and a big. It's a two-way big three. Like, just everything about it, this makes so much sense, and good on the Sixers for going up and paying out and do it. Yeah. Going out, paying up, and doing it.
And I think we've seen the last few years, like even in Los Angeles, like you find a way to put together a big three, but you can't necessarily say that like Beal, Durant, Booker, you can't necessarily say they fit perfectly in terms of the way they're able to play off the ball, the way they're able to defend. And
Kyrie, Harden, Durant.
Yeah,
Same
Kyrie,
thing.
Harden, Durant. Exactly. So, wow, common denominator being James Harden in a couple of these. But I do think that it is, like you said, a perfect makeup of these three. It's just about, again, an Eastern Conference that's going to have a serious shakeup now and some really competitive teams, which we'll get into with the Knicks too.
Yeah.
And they got to keep pace because, like I said, I don't know. This team didn't have a second. There was no second option. There's nobody out in free agency, as I think we all know, that was deserving of a max contract. This was a team that if they weren't able to, I don't know what they would have done. Do you think they would have sat with Maxey being a free agent for like another month and tried to make a big trade to be able to fill that spot?
I think once they knew, I'm sure they knew like LeBron wasn't actually going anywhere. So I think their next move might have been, if they couldn't get PG via free agency, okay, fine, re-sign Maxey. You're not going to use the cap space anyway. I think then they go the trade route because they do have some interesting assets after the Harden trade. Yeah. And maybe then they try to become a player for like a Lowry Markkanen or something.
Yep. Yeah, I did see that.
But you mentioned the shakeup in the East. We're going to get to the Knicks soon too. Before we do that, we're going to talk about the West team that Paul George is leaving.
Yeah.
I want your thoughts first. I'll kind of rant on my own. I've also got an unfiltered episode coming out this week about it, but I want your thoughts. Like, when you see that, do you see it as like, yeah, it makes sense, the Clippers like shouldn't have paid both these injury-prone guys, or what are your thoughts on it?
I don't think it really comes down to the injury-prone thing. I think a lot of this comes down to, and I'm sure you've got more expertise on this than I do, so I'm looking forward to hear you talk about this, but I've kind of eased my stance on this in that I do think that the Clippers are in a position where they don't want to get into that luxury tax threshold. It's just preposterous. What is it, 52% or something?
Well, it's
like that by the second
We'll
year?
get into it, but there are so many levels to it because there's the regular luxury tax threshold, there's the first apron, and then there's the second apron. That second apron is what teams really want to avoid. The luxury tax has become more punitive in general, and like then there's the repeater tax.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
Pay, like, basically, the more you go into the tax, and the more often you go into the tax, you pay a higher tax rate per dollar spent above the tax.
And you're seeing Golden State make the adjustments to what they're paying their guys to be able to stay under that. The Nuggets didn't do much in free agency. I hate to say this, but this is a team that's probably just cutting their losses. And I know the future does not look good when it comes to the draft picks that were, given up to be able to acquire James Harden, who we just mentioned. That you can't really. You're not afforded the opportunity to be able to rebuild, really. But this is a team that's probably cutting their losses and saying, the makeup of these three guys, sure, we can be, the 4 or 5 seed in the West as we've been in years past, but can we really win a championship? And expect to see a guy like Kawhi Leonard on the floor for us come the end of the season, that we can actually take this group, pay this type of money, and be able to get it done. Like, now there'll still be a team that I think will play postseason basketball, maybe give one of these top seeds a scare at some point in the year, but it's not a team that's obviously built to win a title. And I think that's really what this team is doing, cut their losses and saying, we'll just take what we can get from what we have now, and we need to start thinking about what's next as opposed to what's right now. And George is a player that's obviously not going to be a fan of that, considering where he's at in his career.
So I completely get that argument from the Clippers' perspective of like, in general, I get, look, cutting your losses. We don't actually think we can compete for a title with these guys. Maybe they're too injury prone, they're too old, whatever that case is. I get that argument in general. I just think the Clippers are like one of the few teams, maybe the team, that can least afford to make that argument in roster building because, like as you mentioned, there's no rebuild coming. They do not control their own first-round pick until 2030.
Yeah,
they could bottom out the next 6 years and not reap the benefits of that losing in the draft lottery, in the draft.
Yeah.
They don't have any young talent.
I know, it is bad.
They have Kawhi locked up for another couple of years.
But it's like 3 years.
Yeah, it's
like, it's not like we're talking 5.
No, but
6.
But my point is, they are so locked into this team, and there's no avenues to there's no benefit from losing. There's no benefit to a rebuild. If they were just gonna be resigned to, as you were saying, cutting their losses and we can't win, so we'll just kind of be this semi-competitive team. To me, that makes no sense given their position. What they should have done, if they had come to that conclusion that we don't think we can actually win with these guys anymore.
And usually teams do not come to that conclusion.
Right, but
it's very hard to get there.
If they had that moment of self-awareness, why didn't they trade one of PG or Kawhi earlier and actually go the Brooklyn route when they started dismantling their super team?
Well, I think they really liked what they were going to... And there was a period of this season that they went exactly what they loved about that trio.
They went 26-5 shortly after Harden got there. And then it's... Even if you start reading through the reports, the 3-year deal they were willing to offer George would have made them a second apron team. Mm-hmm. So now the reporting that came out later, it's they tried to avoid the second apron, but but they were going to be okay being a second apron team with a 3-year deal. So Are you telling me at the end of the day, the straw that broke the camel's back was just whether to give him a 4th year or not? You're all in already.
Yeah.
Who cares about 2027, 28? At least Kawhi, Paul George, and James Harden, I get it. It was far from the safest path to a championship, but at least the upside was there. If everything did ever go right, they could have won a title. Kawhi, Harden,
I love Kawhi.
And depth.
He's my favorite player of maybe of all time
healthy.
that I've watched, and at the top, at his best, is just incredible.
But now they're banking on the more injury prone, the better, but the more injury prone of the two superstars that were injury prone. 34-year-old James Harden and more depth. That doesn't come with a championship ceiling.
No.
But they're still just as screwed for the future. That's why I'm just so confused about their reasoning here, where it's there's no benefit to this.
No.
Sure, Steve Ballmer saved some money, but again, if you read the reports and what they were offering George, they weren't really concerned with saving money in the short term anyway. So what the hell are we doing here?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, how do rich people get rich? It's not by spending money, but at the same time, I do feel it was definitely really interesting that the two teams had kind of decided they were parting ways. What was it, a day before free agency opened or so? I thought that they would be in the mix up until George decided. Much like we'll get into with Klay. It seemed like Klay had a few teams into the mix and made a decision between a few options. So, I again, there's a lot of different ways to think about this Clippers team, but none of them are good.
Well put.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned Klay. What are your thoughts on Thompson to the Mavs?
I think we were dead on when we talked about this before free agency, that there was just no world where he was going back to the Bay. I like, and I know you mentioned this in some of the notes you sent me, and I was thinking the same thing of just the way that this offense was built throughout the postseason, of being able to kick it out to some key guys on the perimeter, and he's obviously, I think, still capable of doing that. Still like a 38, 39% 3-point shooter, but I don't know. There's not a lot of there weren't a ton of options for this team too to be able to really build out and add to this roster a little bit. So I don't mind it. I don't think I really love it though, because I think how Golden State felt about him has to speak volumes, I think, when it comes to what's left in his game.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely not the Klay Thompson of old. Mm-hmm. I think Dallas is a great spot for him in terms of being able to maximize what he still does. Obviously his shooting, his movement shooting, his off-ball work, I think is going to be really great in an offense, designed around Luka and Kyrie dribbling and kicking, driving and kicking it out. I think that's great. I think the concern is going to be on the defensive end.
Yeah.
Because Klay, who was at one point an all-defensive caliber guard, is not that guy anymore. Mm-hmm. His explosiveness is gone. He's a liability on the defensive end, and he's probably going to start. I mean, I think they should bring him off the bench, but he's probably going to start.
Yeah, he's going to start.
And you're going to start Luka, Kyrie, and Klay. That is going to leave you with some defensive problems, and I think that's where the issues will come up and where you are going to see the downsides of Klay. The good news for Dallas, even though they lost Derrick Jones Jr., who was one of their best defenders, a good rim running threat for Luka, they got Naji Marshall,
who a lot of teams were a lot of teams interested in adding Naji Marshall.
Rightfully so, because this guy is a grimy defender. He kind of goes under the radar, was part of one of the best benches in the league in New Orleans. Grimy defender who was never a shooter, but this past season had his best shooting season.
Our beautiful graphics.
Look at we got graphics now. We got graphics. Look at this. The show's coming along. We've come so far. But yeah, he's this improved shooter. And yeah, he's going to prove that it was real because it was a one-year blip for now. But the interesting thing with Naji Marshall is where he really excelled and improved as a shooter this past season was from the corners. And the team that creates the most corner threes is the Dallas Mavericks because of that driving kick game of Luka and Kyrie we talked about. So if you want to talk about kind of like low-key free agent pickups that no one's talking about, he's not a max guy, he's never going to be an all-star, but could really pay dividends for a team, similar to when Dallas signed Derrick Jones Jr. for the minimum last year. I think it could be Dallas again with Naji Marshall this year because I think he fits what they need, and I think they can really help him be the best version of himself. And I think we could be sitting here months from now talking about how good he looks in Dallas and how this was one of the steals of the offseason.
Yeah, the same way we talked about their trade deadline additions with PJ too. So, I'm not. Again, we said this earlier. It just wasn't a super exciting free agency from some of these, some of these teams that are looking for that extra piece that to take them over the top. I still think Dallas is in a good spot with a couple of additions, and I do think that this made a lot of sense for Klay, getting out from San Francisco and getting somewhere else where he probably is a little bit more wanted. I saw that obviously the Lakers were interested too, and I think it was between the two of them right up until his decision, and that was why LeBron said he was willing to take some sort of pay cut to get him there.
Guys, he was reportedly willing to take a pay cut if he came.
Yeah, and I don't know. That would have meant Russell would have been gone, right? Which I'm not too concerned about. Those two guys are almost like two peas in a pod at this stage of their careers.
The interesting thing is the report is that the Lakers offered 4 years, $80 million. The Mavs gave him $350, and he went to Dallas.
Yeah.
One thing I will add on this, and research. It was Google and then using like Wealth Simple and TurboTax calculators, but I did look into because Texas has no state income tax. California has one of the higher tax rates.
Yeah.
So I did see, according to these tax-related U.S. websites, $50 million in Dallas would be the equivalent of like $72 million in L.A. While it seems like he turned down $30 million, it's more like $8 million, and I think Dallas is actually the better spot for him. So $8 million a little easier to walk away from to go to a better spot than $30 million. So it makes a little more sense. Yeah. Quickly on the Warriors. Unlike everything,
actually,
go ahead.
Quickly too, I wanted to ask what you thought of the Pels trade and what
DeJounte Murray.
Yeah, what is this? This team isn't going forward with these four guys. Right?
No, I think Ingram's gone. I think they're going to find a trade partner for Brandon Ingram at some point this summer. I just don't think a team with Zion, Ingram, Murray, and McCollum is. It's a very expensive, mediocre team to me.
Yeah.
If you can turn Ingram into like more pieces, I think it could make sense, but so much just still depends on Zion being able to stay healthy. Yeah. Unfortunately, whether any fault of his own or not, it just doesn't seem like that's ever going to be the case.
And they didn't get themselves, unless there was something I missed under the radar, any like rim protecting big.
No, and they lost JV, which not that he was a rim protecting big, but they did lose him, and they need a center. And right now, as things currently stand, they would probably be starting Zion at center, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see.
I like Ingram. I'm shocked that his career has not taken off more, especially with his early days. And I thought he was really going to be a Jason Tatum level player, considering his length and everywhere he can score from. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what teams are interested, because I obviously think it definitely means that he's going to be gone. I can't imagine anyone else has better value. Like McCollum at this stage in his career probably doesn't have the value that Ingram does at his age. So
Ingram,
weird move.
Yeah.
Weird move from the Pels. I don't really get it.
Yeah, and they're just in that logjam of like the Warriors and some of these other teams. This logjam.
They're trying to get over the hump.
Right. They're not good enough. I don't really see a move they can make can get them into the top tier of the West. And then, like even the Warriors, they pivot from Klay. I thought they actually did really well after losing Klay. They got Melton, they got slow-mo Kyle Anderson. And what I was going to say is I think, in contrast to everything I said about the Clippers, the Warriors with Klay was an example of a team that knew when to walk away from this, former star that could actually get better by letting him walk because there was other things they can do. And that's in very stark contrast to what we were saying about the Clippers, where they let this guy, this current all-star, walk without any way to actually get better or come close to replacing him. The
like
Warriors,
Melton could be like what DiVincenzo was for them 2 years ago,
solid
right?
player. Kyle Anderson's a good player, and the Warriors are apparently in the mix for a guy like Markkanen. They're in talks apparently
for
signing
George
Field. They were in the mix for George, so I think there's another move out there for the Warriors to make. I don't think they're quite dead yet. They're close. They're on life support, but they're not quite dead yet.
They're probably not much different than the team that they were this past season, winning 46 games.
Yeah, which in the West it's like nice, but
it's going to have you playing that extra 1 or 2 games before
exactly.
the postseason.
Exactly. All right, you had mentioned the Knicks earlier, and how Philly stacks up to some of the teams in the East. The Knicks made the biggest trade of the offseason so far. And, if you've been following along with the Knicks the last few years as they've been rising up the East, they traded for Anunoby already, but the big talk was, what are they going to do with all those picks they have? Is it going to be Donovan Mitchell? Is it going to be Paul George? Is it going to be insert perennial all-star name here? Well, they ended up trading a lot of those picks, 5 of them to be exact, 4 of them, and a protected one as a 5th, for a guy who's actually made no all-star appearances. Yeah. Mikal Bridges. Very good.
That's what everybody is talking about, is just that.
He's a very good two-way player.
Oh, and he's
but a not all-star.
He's the Tibbs. That's the Tibbs dream. The guy that's always available.
Dude, has not missed a game in his career.
And I mean, again, there's just no better. Like, he's kind of the perfect fit for this team when you talk about that. And then obviously, bringing the Villanova Wildcats back together. And I'm sure it just, those guys are definitely loving this opportunity. And this team looks very deep, looks very good, and if they continue to get the play of that Mikal Bridges has been providing over the past couple of years, now in a position where he's got tons of options all around him to be able to benefit him, I think this was a good move from the Knicks. I know it's a lot of assets, but man, this roster looks like it can run some teams off the floor late in the season with just the startling amount of depth they have. Yeah.
Well, you just go through. I mean, they got Jalen Brunson, who, is as good as you can get without. If people talk about Tatum, obviously, I don't think Brunson's quite as good as Tatum, but people talk about Tatum when we talked about it in discussing the championships winning the title, the Celtics winning the title, as kind of the best you can get without being in that upper tier of superstars, right? Brunson's kind of knocking on that door too. And now he's got OG, he's got Bridges, he's got Randall, obviously. Maybe he ends up getting moved at some point, but he's there right now.
Can we talk about that?
Bridges,
why
Robinson, DiVincenzo, Hart, Brooke maybe a Chu if they bring him back. That's a great
bench
rotation.
Is just, oh my God. But can we talk about why? I'm trying to understand why Julius Randle has to be moved.
I don't think he has to be moved. I think it's that if they realize at some point soon that this team and that rotation we just talked about is very good and, knocking on the door of great, but not quite there, and they do need to get one more, star, something close to it.
What is it, though?
I don't know, but this kind of was going to get to my point, and you answered the question I was going to ask you, because I was going to ask you, do you think it's an overpay? But you said you think it's a good move.
I think it's an overpay, but it's necessary.
Exactly.
That's all it really is.
And that's the thing. It's a justifiable overpay in the sense that in a vacuum, if you say you're trading 5 picks for a non-all-star, of course that's an overpay. But there are, not every overpay is the same, and it depends on who's trading for the guy, what their situation is. In the Knicks case, we don't have to agree with it, but they believe that Mikal Bridges puts them over the hump of going from like a fringe contender to a legitimate, we can win a championship. And if there's a guy out there that can give that to you, can get you over the hump, it doesn't matter whether he's an all-star or not or what, he's worth it. If there's a trade out there that can get you into legitimate, we can win a championship territory, it's worth it. It's not an overpay. The question, of course, is whether they're actually in that territory. Liz, I thought healthy last year, they were the biggest threat to Boston in the East. I think they're even better now. I do wonder, though, if on some level they raised their floor, which was already pretty high, where they added another really good piece, not a superstar, not even a star, but like a star within his role. They got a lot better, but I don't know if they actually raised their ceiling that much. Like, I don't know if...
Because if you look, again, I get what you're saying. Like, you match up this team with the Celtics team. The Celtics take, where the litany of depth is of Brunson, Bridges, OG, Randall. and they go, we'll see those four for the four that is Tatum, Brown, White, Porzingis. It's like, yes, those are four guys collectively that are definitely much more talented than that four. But then you just keep running through. You get to the fifth, you get to the sixth, the seventh guy. Those are impactful players, especially in the latter parts of the year, and something that this team was ultimately their downfall, and why they didn't beat a Pacers team that I definitely think that they were better than. A lot of stuff happened throughout the course of an NBA season, though, where that depth that they have, that it will definitely, I think, is going to be better than Boston's is, could be a difference maker because of, you miss one or two pieces of Porzingis that never stays available. I missed Holiday. That's what I didn't even mention.
Yeah,
this
big piece.
Celtics team.
But I think it's a good point, too, because what I do think, I was kind of like tongue-in-cheek jabbing the Knicks, but not really when I was saying that. Everyone thought they were saving these picks for a Paul George or Donovan Mitchell that ends up being a Mikal Bridges.
It's so hard to make one of those deals at this point.
And I think what the Knicks kind of did is they went more the Celtics route. And what I mean by that is, like I was saying, right? Like, you can compare Brunson and Tatum in certain ways. Their games aren't the same. But in terms of their impact of being like, Brunson is like, at worst, a top 20 player, and on his best nights looks like a top 10, like knocking on the door, top 5. Like, he's incredible. And so the Knicks, what they ended up doing was building a team where you have no weak points. You're like 7 or 8 deep with legit, like, playoff caliber rotation talent.
Yep.
They've got multiple guys who can be all-star caliber players on any given night. And I think what this trade does is it sends them down that path, which just worked for Boston, as opposed to having a top-heavy 2 superstars, maybe a third all-star, but then no depth. The Knicks went the other way, saying, we think our best guy is good enough that if we just surround him with no weak players, like all really, really good players, guys who know their roles, that'll get us over the hump. I think it's a fine bet to make. Like, I'm not going to hate on them for doing that.
Yeah, it's July 4th. The New York Knicks are the Miller Lite version of the Boston Celtics. I think it's very obvious, and that is not a bad thing in my opinion. This is the second best team in the East for me.
Well, okay, yeah, just answered another one of my questions, because I was just about to ask. Right now, if we don't know anything else about what they do between now and April or May, you put this Knicks team and this new Sixers team on the court, best of 7 series. Who you taking?
I think I would take the Knicks. I love how well coached they are. I love how they look defensively with these additions, and I trust the depth, especially when you get to that point of the season that these two teams meet up, and the way that the tail end of years have gone for Joel Embiid throughout his career. We talked about Paul George as well. I think in adding George, this is a Sixers team that's going to take some hits when it comes to their depth too. So I really like the Knicks. I think I would be taking the Knicks. It wouldn't be like Knicks in 5 or anything like that, but I like the Knicks over the 76ers makeup. And but it's not by a deciding margin, and that could potentially be, who knows. It could be an Eastern Conference final matchup, because I could see either one of these teams knocking off the Celtics come this time next year too.
I think I would give the edge to the Sixers, but I'm the same boat where it's like, I think it's almost a toss-up at this point, and they would think it would be a 7-gamer. It'd be great. But I do think those two teams are in their own little tier after the Celtics, and then there's a gap between them and Milwaukee or whoever else needs. Like, I do think the Knicks and the Sixers have separated themselves from the rest of the second tier.
Yeah, and you have, like you said, you have Milwaukee. The East is going to be very good with the way the Pacers looked this past year.
Orlando getting KCP.
Orlando, and then the Cavs being that same kind of team. But the East is going to be very good. But again, I think about that, and then I say, well, the Celtics just took care of business of those
and they
teams I said are going to be good.
Can
we talk about the Nets for a second?
We can.
I kind of love what they're doing, because I think I said this last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, that this team was maybe ramping up for bringing some splashy additions in next year. That kind of seems out the window.
You know who that splashy addition might be? Cooper Flagg.
Yeah.
Because they might get the number 1 pick next year.
Yeah, and then they'll take a couple of years to decide what they want to do post that. I've been a strong proponent of, and this is why I felt this way about when we talked about the Clippers, but they obviously can't initiate the rebuild that the Nets are doing. If you're not in the tier or have that top 5 to 8 level player, mind you, the Knicks are definitely I've said this and then I said what I said about the Knicks, that it's definitely not a bad idea at all to be tearing down and trying to rebuild and trying to find that guy, trying to find the Victor Wembanyama, trying to find the Luka Doncic. You get what I mean. So I don't mind it for the Nets, but this is also a franchise that is just very, what's the word I'm looking for? They have PTSD from the KG Paul Pierce days.
As they should.
And I think that very, very interesting I think it's an obvious deal to take for Bridges. If somebody sends you that type of offer, let's just initiate the rebuild. Yeah. And then the Rockets deal was just awesome. I'm like, this can only happen in the NBA. Yeah. Like, never will you see.
They traded, or they made like pick swap related trade to get their own picks, to get control of their own picks back, which they had originally traded to Houston for James Harden when they were in another mode of their, many, many rebuilds where they were constructing their wannabe super team. The Nets, man, have been through so much over the last decade, but I will give them credit for this. Again, when I was talking about, I keep bringing it back to the Clippers and how disappointed I am, but when I was talking about how, hey, if the Clippers had this moment of self-awareness where they realized they couldn't win with these guys, but they also knew how screwed they were for the future, they should have started, traded one of those guys earlier and start trying to recoup some draft capital, because that's how this started for Brooklyn. At first, it wasn't their own picks. They knew they were out of their own picks, and if they were going to be bad, those picks were going to go to someone else. They bit the bullet and did it anyway when Sean Marks, their GM, first got there. And what they did is they accumulated young talent and draft picks, and again, it wasn't their own picks, but they built a scrappy, up-and-coming young team and opened up cap space and eventually lured Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving there. Now, it didn't work, but no one could have argued with that at the time.
Yeah.
Then, when James Harden got there, they traded all those picks. They tried to build a super team. That failed spectacularly, very quickly. What'd they do? They quickly pivoted, traded Kevin Durant for a boatload of picks, traded Kyrie Irving for picks and stuff. We're going to rebuild again around Mikal Bridges
and Cam
of the Johnson.
Suns. I like that. I like that a lot.
And it did look like, hey, now this is a team that in a couple years they can get another star.
Yeah.
Instead, they realized, nope, we're actually too far back in the East and in the arms race here. Even if we get a guy, it's not going to be enough. What we're really going to do is start from the bottom all over again. Yeah. So what they do, they then trade Bridges, who they got in the Durant deal, for another boatload of picks, make the fascinating deal with Houston that you're referencing to get control of their own picks back. And now look, they have a fresh slate, a clean slate. They can properly bottom out and do a proper rebuild. Yeah, it's going to take some time, but they can do it right. And I just think this, obviously this is a very unique circumstance. Usually teams take 40 years to go through all the different levels that the Nets have gone through in the last decade. But if there's one thing you can give them credit for, I think it's being self-aware, knowing when to go all in, but also when to have the self-awareness to be like, no, we got to start again.
Because that's exactly what the Clippers haven't been. We keep talking about the Clippers, but if you're an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, you're like, yes. If you're Detroit Pistons fans, you're like, yeah, good. You could try it, but it might not come together like you envisioned it to come together. Because at the end of the day, you be the worst team in basketball. It doesn't mean you're going to have the number one overall.
No, and now the lottery odds are flat too, where the bottom 3 or 4 teams all have the same odds. So
I don't like. We can get into that conversation another time. I definitely don't like that very much. I hate the fact that I feel terrible for Detroit and the fact that they've been this bad.
Build a better team.
Yeah,
build a better team.
No, it's fair.
And
that's why Tobias Harris will be in town to take that team.
So they can go from 15 wins to 18. A Western Conference team that is trying to build a better team, and it's a lot easier to do that when you have Victor Wembanyama, is the San Antonio Spurs. One of the more surprising, I'd say shocking moves of the offseason was Chris Paul. This ringless future Hall of Famer that you would assume tail end of his career, probably going to ring chase. Yeah. No, he goes to one of the teams that was one of the worst teams in the league last year, in the last couple of years, in San Antonio, signs a 1-year deal to partner with Victor Wembanyama to play for Greg Popovich. I think this is a really cool partnership in the sense that from Chris Paul's perspective, hey, he wants to play for Pop. He wants to play with this young prodigy, maybe see something there that he can help bring out of this team. He's not ring chasing at the end of his career. And for the Spurs, I think Chris Paul brings a lot of things they need, not just the veteran leadership and mentorship for their young guards like Trey Jones and Devin Vassell, but a really good partner for Victor Wembanyama, a pick-and-roll partner, a guy who's going to get guys the ball in spots they need the ball. And the thing that I think, low-key, makes San Antonio interesting, and there's still more they can do. Like, I don't think as presently constructed they're a contender. But
No.
traditionally, teams with a player as good as Victor Wembanyama is already and is going to be, we're talking that transcendent level, don't stay bad for long. Like, they contend very quickly, and they're at least competitive from like a play-in playoff spot very quickly.
Yep.
The
And
Spurs,
the bottom, once you get past all those exciting teams we talked about in the East, there's
the bottom drops off.
In the West.
The Spurs, for as bad as they were, like a 60-loss team, when Victor Wembanyama had any semblance of competent guard play on the court with him, and we could put the numbers up now since we got, like, my heart skips a beat anytime I see these graphics on the screen. I'm just so happy we've got these professional-looking graphics.
And that graphic for anyone looking is just
it's insane.
shocking.
Wembanyama, and we're not talking about a small sample. It's like 1,200 plus minutes when he shared the floor with Trey Jones, who, listen, I like Trey Jones, good young guard, not exactly an all-star. Wembanyama was on the court with him. The Spurs performed like a very good team in a big sample. Even when he was on the court with Vassell, an above-average team. When he didn't have either one of those guys, when they didn't have, they were trying point Sohan for a lot of last year, trying to see Jeremy Sohan spread his wings because they were a bad team. They were awful. They need competent guard play with Wembanyama, and if they give him that, they can be like a play-in caliber team already this year.
Well, I said James Harden, guys. Credit to me, but they got themselves the older, scoreless version of James Harden.
But I think it's going to be good for them. Like,
Again, we talked about this, just needing a facilitator, and it was very obvious from the graphics there and from the guard play they got last year. So, I think it's I don't know. I'm being an East Coast guy, hand up. I didn't watch a ton of Warriors basketball this year. How do we feel about Chris Paul's ability to affect the game moving forward? Like, it's kind of an interesting pivot for him.
I think, look, he's not all-star Chris Paul anymore, but I still think he's a decent defender as a guard. He's still an elite playmaker in terms of his vision and the things he can do, not the scorer he once was, but I think at worst you're getting like average to above average guard play from him in 20 to 25 minutes a night, better than what they had last year. And I think the thing with the Spurs is, and maybe they don't make that move yet, but there's a big move for them to make because they've got, other than OKC and Utah, probably the most, and Brooklyn now, the most draft capital, trade capital in the league. I think this is the team, and I know we're going a little off topic now, but the Warriors have been rumored to be going after Lauri Markkanen. If I'm the Spurs, and I think about what a Markkanen-Wembanyama frontcourt would look like and how perfectly those guys would complement each other, I do not let anybody outbid me for Lauri Markkanen. Go get Lauri Markkanen. If the Spurs traded for Lauri Markkanen right now, I think they could like win a playoff series, even in the blood.
I don't think I'm there. I think I still need some better guard play from this team to be able to I feel like they're just at least another year or two away of building out a little bit more of their backcourt to feel comfortable giving someone a big ticket deal. Even though I do agree with you. I love where Markkanen has gotten to in his career is just super impressive. So, it's tough for me to say, but I probably wouldn't be all for it quite yet. But you don't get a player like that often and available to you.
Yeah.
All
right, let's close this off-season breakdown episode with the Lakers and LeBron James Jr., Bronny James.
How about we talk about Dalton Knecht? Because I actually love...
That was a great pickup.
I actually love that.
And no one's talking about him because...
Look, he's a defensive liability, but he was one of the most enjoyable players to watch in college, and he's very much ready. Oh, yeah. Very much ready for the NBA to be able to step in and give you... Somebody said, as everybody's looking at the photo of Bronny and Knecht, that this was the
Lifetime
the
Lifetime movie version of like someone playing
of Austin Reeves and LeBron James.
Great tweet. Listen, I think Knecht's going to be good for them. I think he's going to work really well off of LeBron and AD. Yeah. I think that was a really good pick at that point in the draft. Obviously, the one everyone's talking about there is the guy that was sitting beside him at that intro press conference is Bronny James.
Look, we are kidding ourselves to think that this is not exactly how this was constructed to go from the very beginning. Yes, rumors were Bronny's comfortable going anywhere. Like, he will play for any team. His dad is not dead set on playing with his son. And then a day before draft day, it's do not draft him or he's going to
Yeah.
Zimbabwe. He's going to Australia. But this was what was going to come together, I think, from the outset. And obviously the Lakers were able to get it done from avoiding the absurdities of, hey, we might take him with the first pick that we have.
Yeah, which
in this
listen,
draft.
I don't think that was ever happening.
No.
Yeah. And fair enough. I don't think Bronny didn't deserve to be a first round pick. Definitely didn't deserve that. But
we don't need, it's hard to give an original opinion on this considering how much has been beaten over the head and you've heard literally everything that could be said about this guy. But ultimately, this is a guy that had a heart condition, had a serious medical issue, which is obviously going to impact, his play and his progression as a player in year one with at USC. That there is still a lot to unpack when it comes to his game. So
100%.
There's no reason this guy shouldn't have been a second round pick. You can't. I don't have a problem with that by any means.
And I'm glad you said that because I wrote about this last week. But people need to lay off Bronny a little bit and this pick in that he was not a first round pick. Okay, he was the 55th pick in the draft. Go back through history and not just the 55th pick. Look at second round picks. There's 20% of them last 4 or 5 years in the league. If you look at the 55th pick in general, the last decade or so, other than Aaron Wiggins, who's a solid player in Oklahoma City, the other 9 guys have averaged 20 games in the NBA. Not 20 games per season, 20 games total.
Yeah.
So in general, this is a spot in the draft where most guys drafted don't end up with NBA careers. Second of all, do you know for how long, and it still happens, how many teams basically throw away second-round picks on draft and stash guys, international guys? We're not talking about promising ones like Nikola Jokic.
I could go through so many guys from this year, like Isaiah Collier, who was at USC. He was supposed to be a top pick in this past year's draft, and then his season didn't come together very well, and he falls much later. He might have even been an undrafted free agent, to be honest with you. But there are plenty of intriguing players that could likely be potentially impactful players that don't go drafted. The Raptors had Brendan Carlson out of Utah, who I really like and fits is a good fit for them as a team, and being a center and being a big that this team probably needs to find and develop. That undrafted free agent, second round pick, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, and like I was saying, the teams for years have thrown away second round picks on draft and stash guys, international guys who they know are never going to sniff the NBA. I'm not talking about the drafting of a Nikola Jokic in the second round that they had promised. No, drafting and stashing international guys that they knew were never coming to the NBA to save money. So that you save
that's
money
what you're getting to.
And you save a roster spot.
I thought you were saying it more of there's projects. There's
what I'm
tons of
saying
projects.
is the teams have been wasting second round picks for years. And I don't remember anyone ever complaining this could have been used on a more deserving player. You know, most second round picks, like I said, definitely most 55th picks never make the NBA anyway. LeBron's son, because everyone does like to hate on LeBron, comes along. And okay, fine. His dad's team took him. I get it. But this is not some egregious thing where they wasted a first round pick on this guy who doesn't belong anywhere near the NBA. The other thing to remember is, look, some of it because of his name for sure, but at one point, Bronny James was a pretty highly touted recruit.
Well, you've seen
he was a top 20 recruit.
Bronny game.
Yeah, he was a top 20
around.
recruit in the class of 2023. Around a year ago, before he had that heart issue, he was projected as a first round pick.
Yeah.
Then he had a literal near-death experience where his heart stopped. Yep. Okay, that was addressed, but I'm not going to just forget all of the good stuff from when he was a legitimate prospect because a teenager had a bad year in his lone year of college after a near-death experience. And then, I'll add, he actually had a pretty good showing at the Combine. His first day wasn't great, but then he had a good second day. He had really impressive athleticism measures at the Combine. I think 6th highest max vert. And for a guy that's supposed to be a 3-and-D guard, ended up with the second best score in the non-stationary shooting, the movement shooting drills, went 19 of 25. So if you just add all that up, if you say, hey, here's a guy who a year ago was seen as maybe a first-round prospect in a weak draft, then he had a bad college year, but then he had a really good Combine, and then he went 55th in the draft, you'd be like, yeah, that sounds about right. Someone took a flyer on him. This isn't... I just think we don't need to pile on this guy.
Yeah, and there's so many holes you can poke in first round picks. I could go through so many guys. I watch a ton of college hoops, just like I go to another Raptor because I'm a Raptors fan, but Jacoby Walter has like no interior game whatsoever. He's basically going to stand out at the 3-point line for this Raptors team, and there's a lot missing in his bag of tricks. And we're talking about a guy that was like, what was he?
The 19th pick,
yeah. Or even Zach Edey. Like, there's a lot of question marks as to whether or not he's going to get up and down the floor and be able to hold his own in the NBA. We're talking about a guy who went top 10. There's tons of things to talk about every single guy that went ahead of Bronny too. So, no problem.
Yeah, I'm at the point. I'm rooting for Bronny, man. I hope he carves out a role in some respect in the NBA. I still think he can be a 3-and-D player, even if it's off the bench. I think he has a 3-and-D role.
Yeah,
he's undersized, but he's long. Can maybe shoot. Has, from all reports, is a coachable kid. Good basketball IQ. Like, I think there's something there for him, and I'm definitely not going to fake outrage about the fact that someone used the 55th pick on him.
Yeah, I really hope that's not. We always hear people get mad about saying other people are getting mad about this. People might not even be that mad about it.
I think listen, if the comments on my feature that I wrote about it are any indication, people are mad. People are mad. This is not a straw man. But anyway, I think that's enough for today. I think we touched on a lot from the offseason, and we'll think of other things to talk about to get people mad and engage next week.
It's a 12-month league.
We're actually in Vegas next week.
But yeah,
for Canada-USA pre-Olympic exhibition game. I'll be there for USA minicamp. We'll both be there for a little bit of Summer League.
Yep.
So probably no show next week. We'll be back in a couple weeks. More things will probably have happened by then. We can even talk some Canada-USA Olympic ball. Until then, for Tyler McKillop, I'm Joseph Casciaro. This has been The Unfiltered Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe.